Welcome, everyone. I'm Kyle Ron. I am the President and CEO of United Way of Southern Nevada. And I want you all to sit back and enjoy today. I think this is going to be really helpful. I know it is for us, and we're thrilled to be able to bring this to you. A couple housekeeping items is the chat box has been turned off for all of the attendees. So we're going to ask that you submit any questions for our panelists via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Technical questions may also be submitted via the Q&A feature and will be answered by our team. We also want you to know that this webinar is being recorded. We will share it with our attendees, and we hope that you will also share it with those that you know that couldn't be here. So, as I said, I'm the President and CEO of United Way of Southern Nevada, and I want today to introduce my colleague, Michael Brazier, who's the President and CEO of United Way of Northern Nevada and the Sierra. I would like to thank our partners in this, Nancy Hamilton and Kelly Goodman at Wells Fargo, Jocelyn Cousins of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, and Miles Dixon of the Nevada Grant Lab. A special thank you also goes to Christine Hess, who was very instrumental in helping us at the Nevada Housing Coalition. So I've shared with you about putting your questions in the Q&A in the section. And now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Michael Brazier from the North.
Thank you, Kyle. My name is Michael Brazier, CEO and President of United Way of Northern Nevada and the Sierra. We're proud to partner with you and the other committee members to offer this webinar to our nonprofit community today. As we all know, COVID-19 has transformed our world in ways that we cannot even fathom. The way that we do business has completely changed. The way we're impacting our communities and clients has completely changed. On top of this economic crisis created by the pandemic, our communities are calling for us to address the inequities and systematic racism that exist in our country that contributed to the tragic killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many others. Addressing these inequities and this racism must be at the forefront as we continue to adapt and innovate in the new normal. It is important that we are supporting each other as a nonprofit community and that we're connecting and sharing ways and ideas to become more resilient as we move from the immediate response to recovery. While we are planning for this recovery, we cannot return to the pre-COVID February, but we need to think of a new normal. We need to reimagine and rebuild our communities and our work. We need to reimagine opportunities for all that result in more equitable and resilient communities. We need to reimagine collaborations between nonprofits that are driving significant change to create a thriving Nevada. Our hope today is that this webinar will be a starting point for long-term conversations as we work together to become a more resilient Nevada nonprofit community. Today, you will hear from the U.S. President of United Way Worldwide and then spend some time interacting with a panel of peer nonprofit leaders that will share how they've adapted and working towards becoming more resilient. I'm excited to have you join us today, and I'm going to turn it back over to Kyle to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Michael. I can't tell you how thrilled and ecstatic Michael and I were to know that we were going to be joined as our speaker, Suzanne McCormick, who is the President of United Way Worldwide for the USA. She became the president of UWW USA in 2019, and she is responsible for helping the 1,100 local United Ways across the US trailblaze philanthropic space to build more resilient and inclusive and sustainable communities. She came to United Way Worldwide from Tampa, Florida, where she spent 5 years as president and CEO for United Way of Suncoast, one of Florida's largest United Ways. In that time, she cultivated growth, increased community impact, and led a strategic plan to break the cycle of generational poverty. Having previously served as a former chair of United Way Network Partnership Group and the National Professional Council, she continues to enable the teams to develop and leverage powerful philanthropy initiatives. She brings invaluable insights as the immediate past chair of United Ways of Florida that lends to the ongoing collaboration with United Way state associations. Suzanne began her nonprofit leadership career at the International Center of New York, and then as the CEO for both the American Red Cross of Southern Maine and the People's Regional Opportunity. She joined the United Way of Greater Portland in Maine, where she provided 13 years of leadership including 4 as president and CEO. She holds a BA in political science from Duke University and is an alumni of Peace Corps, where she taught English in Thailand. Suzanne is the proud mother of 2 children, Jack, who serves in the U.S. Army, and Fiona. Her husband of 25 years, Bill, is a physical therapist. Suzanne enjoys running, being a soccer mom, and spending time with her family and her 2 Boston Terriers, Finnegan and Olive. And I bet you've had a lot of time with them lately. So with no more to say, I turn it over to you, Suzanne, and thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you for that really kind introduction. Probably one of the most important things you said about my background is that I have 2 dogs, and one of them, Olive, is a habitual Zoom interrupter. So I have her, I'm trying to pet her right now to keep her quiet because I'm sharing a small space with both my pups today. I also want to add my thanks to Wells Fargo, the Federal Reserve Bank, and especially to Kyle and Michael for their leadership. As I'm going to share some of my thoughts and remarks with you, a common theme that you will hear is, or hopefully a common sentiment that you'll hear from me, is just so much pride in our United Way network across the United States and our nonprofit partners. And without question, Kyle and Michael have just amplified, have illustrated that, and just living leadership at the highest degree every single day. So thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm going to share some thoughts on to build on Michael's comments about what I've observed through this experience, not only the pandemic of COVID, but also what I consider this pandemic of racism that has really come to a forefront for all of us, not only across our country, but across the world. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. As Kyle said, I lead the U.S. network of United Ways, which includes 1,100 local United Ways. We are part of a global network with United Ways actually in 40 countries around the world. And every year before COVID, our work was touching over 61 million people around the world, so many of them here in the United States. As Michael said, and we all know, without question, we are in an unprecedented time. And as I've described it, and some of my colleagues have described it, it's as if we're all experiencing having a disaster at the scale of a Category 5 hurricane hit every community in every country around the globe at the same time. In the past, when we were responding to crisis or disasters, it was, while they felt incredibly hard and tragic, they were confined to certain geographies. The fact that now we're all facing the same crisis, it puts huge stress on all of us, but also I think creates a lot of opportunity. In the last 6 months, probably like you all, I remember early on a phone call from Kyle because Nevada Las Vegas was one of those places that was hit so hard from an economic standpoint so quickly when the whole casino and hospitality industry shut down. And I remember that being a very emotional phone call because what you all are going through is it's very real. And now as leaders of nonprofits, not only is it taking a personal toll, it's taking a toll on our organizations. And I think we're all feeling the pressure and the strain of having to meet more needs, but also having to face the reality of declining revenue and declining restricted funding beyond COVID. So it's wonderful that we get to have this conversation today to acknowledge how we've been responding, but also to think about what we've learned that will help carry us through into recovery and into reimagining and ultimately into rebuilding communities. Before I talk about some points of pride, do just want to call out again from a contextual point of view, what we're seeing in the nonprofit sector. Just over the weekend, and I'll be happy to share this article for those of you who may not have seen it through Kyle and Michael, the Wall Street Journal published an article about our sector. While there has been incredible philanthropic support of the COVID response, especially in the early months, the most recent data from Giving USA shows that in March, philanthropic giving declined by 11%. And if you compare it to the same time last year, philanthropic giving is down 6%. And I think, everyone who's looking at or forecasting the trends in the future quarters is anticipating that that will go down even more. The other statistic, which is concerning, but we just have to own in terms of our new reality right now, is that there has also been a decline in donor confidence. The percentage of donors who think it will take at least a year for the economy to improve has risen from about 66% to now 72%. And as of April, 17% of all former donors, to philanthropic giving have stopped. So it's our reality. I think things are going to get harder before they get better. And it's sobering news, but I think there's a lot to learn from this experience. And the best option we have is to capitalize on those learnings and decide how we want to move forward. Just this morning, I had the opportunity, as I was alluding to Olive interrupting my my Zooms, I was asked to join a board meeting of United Way in Ohio. And one of the county administrators who sits on the board, this was in Dayton, Ohio, I thought he had some very wise comments. He was talking about what was happening in his county, and he was talking about from crisis comes opportunity, and that COVID has really tested our dependency on existing structures and old ways of working. And it's also shown us new ways to thread our work together and new ways to work together. And I know that has been happening there in Nevada, and that your United Ways, Kyle and Michael, they are committed to continuing, I think, to bring that spirit of reimagining how you work together as a sector forward. I have a favorite quote that I've been using recently with my team as we've on days when it feels overwhelming or we're not sure what to do. And it's a quote. I'm not sure the background of the person who said this. His name is Lyle Kendrick. But the quote is, we cannot always control everything that happens to us in life, but we can control how we respond. And I have seen so many examples in communities across the country who have chosen to respond to a situation that feels very out of their control, and respond and in a way that they feel very proud of. Again, I saw that happening in Nevada. And I want to share just a couple examples of that. As an immediate response to COVID across our United Way network, we had over half of our local United Ways set up their own COVID-19 relief funds. I know that is true there in Nevada. We also set up a national relief fund that we use to strengthen the 211 network across the country and to make investments into our local United Ways, just to shore up their ability in these uncertain times. In 33 of our 50 states, the 211 was activated actually by the governor's offices to be the go-to place for information on COVID, but also the go-to place to call if not only if you needed information, but if you needed help. And as we've moved through this crisis, we've seen the reliance on 211 continue to be exponentially higher than it's ever been before. The call volume to 211 has increased somewhere between 300 and 400% on a daily basis. The 211 network across the United States gets over 75,000 calls. And the other, I think, really dynamic change that we've seen is prior to COVID, calls to 211 would generally take about 3 to 4 minutes. Now they're taking 30 to 40 minutes because people are not only needing basic needs, there's just an ever-growing increase in mental health needs and supports, emotional supports, personal supports. So while there is still incredible stress, I think the 211 network has really been at the forefront of helping individuals and communities find help and find reassurance. The other point of pride, I think, for us as a nonprofit sector is in how we came together around public policy. We at United Way Worldwide have a strong public policy team. They worked really closely with our United Ways around the country and with other national nonprofits to advocate for the inclusion of nonprofits in the CARES relief bills. The fact that nonprofits of a certain size were able to apply for the payroll protection loans was a first ever. And I think that there has been elevated recognition, and also thank Kyle and Michael for the work that they're doing with your delegation from Nevada. I think without question, society sees the nonprofit sector in a way it may not have seen us before, not just as a nice to have, but an absolute need to have. I think for me, you know, I'm an optimist at heart, and even on the hardest days, I always try to look for what we've learned. And I will say what I've been so impressed with is the innovation and creativity and new ways of approaching work that I have witnessed across the country, from communities organizing virtual volunteer opportunities to finding new ways to get help to people through new and interesting partnerships. And I know some of that's also happening in Nevada. How are you using volunteers to get meals from restaurants, supporting that part of your economy to people who can't go out to get food? Very different than simply opening a food bank. We've also seen some interesting national partnerships develop out of this experience with some unusual suspects for United Way. We now have a new partnership with Porsche USA, who has invested $1 million in national relief. Just learned last week that Kendall Jackson has invested $1 million in national relief. We've developed a new partnership with DoorDash, again, in some cities across the country, to get meals delivered, again, in a safe way and a dignified way. And a partnership that I'm very proud of, which is very new to us, is with BET, Black Entertainment Television. We had not traditionally had a strong relationship, but now through BET, they have raised over $18 million to support communities across the United States, especially focusing on communities of color. And this was prior to the death or the murder of George Floyd, when we were seeing the pandemic have a disproportionate effect on communities of color. BET wanted to help, and after many conversations, they chose United Way Worldwide as their partner because of our ability to be neutral and to convene and to hold the work together at a national level, like I think so many of you are experiencing there in Nevada with the leadership of your local United Ways. Lastly, we got $1 million gift from the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints to support the 211 network. That was not a relationship that we had had in the past. And I think all of that is because United Ways and their nonprofit partners have shown that they could collaborate and work in different ways, that they could come together and thread their work together in ways that they had not in the past. And that power of the collective holistic good, it's the only thing that's going to help us get through these complex times. And I know you all know in your communities, there's rarely a family that shows up with a single problem. More so than ever, our families are challenged in many, many different ways. Last comments I want to make, again, are points of pride for me, and it is around the work that our United Way network has been doing in the face of this pandemic around racism. We have always been involved in the fight for equity, and in the last couple of years really have heightened our focus on supporting our local United Ways with doing their own internal work around equity and also engaging their communities to create more equitable communities. 2 weeks ago, our membership voted to take a really important step to strengthen our commitment to equity by voting to add new membership requirements to what it takes to be a United Way. And now our United Ways will now be required to have a publicly posted statement against racism. They will have to, on an annual basis, engage not only their staff, but their boards of directors in equity training. And they'll have to use some sort of equity lens in their decision-making process as they decide where to make investments in the community. This is a step along a journey, but I hope it stands as demonstration that your United Ways across the country want to be partners and leaders in this space. So I'll wrap up by saying you know, we can't stay in a response mode forever, even though we feel like we're in it. We have to challenge ourselves to think about recovery, to think about how we carry forward into a new normal all of the things that we have learned. We have done some amazing work, and I encourage you all as nonprofit leaders, even while this feels hard, to never go backwards, to always be thinking about how you can be creative, how you can engage your donors even when you can't be with them, and most importantly, how you can engage the people you serve even though you may not be able to be with them. I think things are going to get harder before they get better, but I have never had more faith after having watched how our communities have responded in the ability of the nonprofit sector to change the social landscape of our country. So thanks for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to listening to the panel.
Thank you so much, Suzanne.
Before we transition, Michael, I wanted to just ask Suzanne, your data that you furnished at the beginning about giving trends, if you could give that to United Way of Southern Nevada, and we'll include that in the follow-up materials for everybody, if that's okay.
Absolutely. I will forward the Wall Street Journal article from which that comes.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for that. And thank you for painting that picture of what it looks like across the nation. We all know that it's a hard road ahead, but I think if we come together as a community, right, we can do the reimagining and rebuilding necessary to create those thriving communities. I'm excited for the next part of our call, and I'm going to turn it over to our moderator for our panel, which will have some insight from leaders who have been adapting and working towards their own resilience, knowing that it's a work in progress as we all work forward. But turning it over to Jocelyn Cousins of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. Jocelyn?
Oh, thank you. Had to unmute myself there. Thank you so much, Michael and Kyle. And Suzanne, thank you so much for your comments. We couldn't have opened this up any better than just you framing up our discussion today and just letting us know what United Way is doing across the country. And we appreciate all the work and efforts that you're doing, especially with the focus on equity and just really providing resources to address the COVID pandemic that's impacting our communities tremendously. So thank you very much, and so glad to have you with us here in Nevada. So thank you. As Michael said, I'm Jocelyn Cousins with the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, and I have the pleasure of moderating our panel discussion today. Full bios have been provided to each of you. We wanted to save time for this very interactive discussion that we're going to have, so you can read full bios there, but I'd like to introduce the panelists briefly. We have Erica Mosca. Erica, if you want to just wave, you're there. She is the Executive Director for Leaders in Training. Next, we have Lucy Arellano Baglieri, and she is the Chief Strategy Officer and Senior Vice President for the Low Income Investment Fund. And we have Matt Sinclair, and Matt is the President and CEO of the Discovery Museum. We're really excited about our panelists in that they come and represent a very diverse sector of the nonprofit sector. So their perspectives will be very different because they're coming at the work from a different place. And I think their leadership and the roles that they play will touch each one of you on the line. So we're really excited to have them. So I'm going to just jump in, and just to kind of piggyback off of some of Suzanne's comments, the intent of today is really to talk about the roadmap for resilience, but to also capitalize on the learnings of these leaders that we have on the call with us today. They're peer leaders from the nonprofits, and the plan is to share some of their learnings. So if we can, Erica, I'll turn it over to you to just talk a little bit about your organization and what you do.
Sure, thank you so much. I want to first thank everybody who's here today. I know all of our nonprofit friends are very busy, so the fact you took time out of your day, we really appreciate it. I'm the founder and executive director of Leaders in Training. We ask, why is there not diversity in leadership? When we look at who are our political representatives, to our principals, to our teachers, why do they not look like the communities we serve? And we backwards map that to say that we have to empower students and families to be on a destination that matters to them. And we do that through an after-school program. We support students to be the first in their family to go to college, and more importantly, then come back to Nevada as leaders. We do this through three programs: a high school program, a post-secondary program, and also an alumni program. So our vision is to empower first-generation college graduates to become the next generation of diverse leaders who change the world.
Great. Thank you, Erica. Lucy, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here, and thank you, Jocelyn, for connecting me to this group. I am, as you mentioned, Lucy Ariano Baglieri, Chief Strategy Officer for Lyft, Low Income Investment Fund. We're a national CDFI, but are headquartered in San Francisco. I sit in San Francisco, but we also have offices in New York, Atlanta, DC, and Los Angeles. Lyft is one of the largest CDFIs in the country. We've been around about 35 years. In our home state of California, are the largest CDFI. Since inception, we've deployed over $2.5 billion, primarily with a focus on investment in social determinants of health, some of which we'll talk a little bit more about today. We do that through our lending and through our programs, and we're really excited to just be kicking off year 1 of 4 for a new strategic plan that was really developed pre-COVID and pre-recent events. But to Suzanne's point of pride, is that it really is responsive to current events, because unfortunately we know that the inequities that have really been exacerbated recently are not new. And so really focusing on housing, early care and education, and innovation and lending are key strategies to be able to affect an equitable recovery as well as long-term equity. Our mission statement is that we envision a country where everyone can benefit from communities of equity, well-being, and opportunity. And we obviously can't do that alone. So our vehicles for that are primarily capital and partnerships. And although we are, a larger organization, we are a nonprofit, and so we face a lot of the same challenges, but also, just like all of you, are leveraging the strengths of our staff, of our organization, of our partners, and most importantly, the communities that we're really focused to serve. So great to be here.
Great. Thank you so much, Lucy. Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to United Way for the invitation to participate. I see 185, almost 200 members of our peer group on the call today, and it's humbling to be asked to provide some insight to the conversation, because there's a lot of folks there that I think we could learn from. So it's an honor to serve and be here today. I serve as the president and CEO here at the Discovery Museum in Reno, Nevada. So we're on the north end of the state. The Discovery is 10 years old this September. An interesting time to be celebrating our 10-year anniversary for sure. We are a 70,000 square foot interactive hands-on museum. We'll come back to interactive and hands-on in a little bit in terms of how we respond in a pandemic, but the Discovery is classified as a mid-size science museum. We are an all ages learning center, and so if you have a heartbeat, you are our target audience. We endeavor to serve everybody and create a fun, exciting aha moment. Our mission is really about inspiring wonder. We get to create and curate experiences and learning outcomes in our space that are truly unique and don't happen anywhere else really in people's lives. And we're firm believers that science is a critical element of building strong and healthy communities. And so that's what we do here at the Discovery, to the tune of about 250,000 visitors a year that we touch in some form or another. So thank you again for the invitation to participate, and hope we have something smart to share today.
I hope so. Well, thank you, all of you, for joining us. And when we asked, you all said yes. So thank you very much. We're really excited to share some information with the folks on the line with us today. So let's jump in. We know that the last 6 months have been a very challenging time for all of us personally and professionally. And again, to still a note from Suzanne, when we talk about let's move from crisis to opportunity, or from crisis comes opportunity. So I would like to just ask you all to just kind of level set for the group and let us know about your observations and experiences that your organization has gone through in the last 6 months. And I'll start this time with Matt.
Thanks. I had a conversation with a colleague of mine running another science center not too long ago, and we were commiserating about how overwhelmed we felt just in this environment. We're all working so hard while our businesses are closed or services are scaled back, and it was this weird dichotomy of how can we be working so damn hard and have so little to show for it. And one of the comments that she made to me, which I has carried me through this, is, you know, our country has survived a pandemic before. We have lived through the Great Depression. We have experienced the civil rights movement and social justice issues over the last several decades. We've never done all of that at the same time. And that's really what we're experiencing right now is the compounding effect of all of these things. And I think giving ourselves the permission to recognize that and realize that truly what we're living through is a very unique moment in history and time, at least put some things into perspective. What that means for us here at the Discovery is, and I take personal responsibility for this terrible thing we're all experiencing, because I think I jinxed us. We were sitting in a senior staff meeting in February, and we were looking at our master calendar and our funding plans and commitments. And we were celebrating the fact that we had about the next 3 years of our strategic plan locked in, funded. We were ready to, you know, actually take some PTO and like things are going to work. You know, this is pretty exciting. And then a month later, a whole lot of things happened. And so the observation for the Discovery and here in our community has been, you know, 7 to 10 years worth of really, really hard work to build up the momentum and really execute on the collection of a lot of efforts and plans and support from our community that almost in a matter of moments seems to have evaporated and left us standing here wondering, okay, how do we recover from this? How do we rebuild from this? What does this mean as we go forward? And that has been a whole lot of the discussion. The other thing that's happened as we've watched how our country in particular has responded to this is that if nothing else, this pandemic has taught us that our mission is more important now than ever. You know, science matters, and that's our mantra here. And as we see the level of science literacy and the decisions that people make in our country right now, it's really very clear to us that now more than ever, our organization has a role to play. And that's been exciting and helped drive us through a lot of the decisions we've made about what to do, what not to do, how we're going to respond, and what we look like on the other side.
Great, thank you, Matt. I love that comment, science matters, so definitely. So Lucy, let me turn it to you.
Great, thank you. And I should just note as well that, you know, in addition to us commiserating around some of the shared challenges from the nonprofit world, we don't know it all, I don't know it all. And so while I would really just welcome if anything that that I'm sharing is resonating with you, either where you feel I might be able or Lyft might be able to contribute a little bit more to what you're working on, or in the reverse, if there's something where you feel that we might be able to learn from you, would really appreciate a ping. I'm sure, I think in our bios, probably our emails were shared, otherwise, you know, they're easily available. So just wanted to make that really clear, and we'll thank you in advance for that. With regard to observations, you know, I kind of touched on this in the opening remarks, is that particularly for those of us from communities that have had the most disproportionate impact, you know, undeniable that we all are being impacted by the current pandemic and everything, the economic downturn and all of the even just personal effects, right, of remote working and all of the different things that we're juggling to be able to do that. But this pandemic and the reckoning with systemic racism that Matt named at the beginning of the call really has disproportionately impacted communities of color and low-income communities. And then of course, there's a lot of intersectionality there. So for those of us who, myself, I'm a Latina, I'm an immigrant, come from a family that, had some of the, I can only imagine if COVID would have hit, maybe 30, 40 years ago, what my situation would be very different. So there's a lot of reckoning to do there on our own as nonprofit leaders. I think one of the key observations or experiences is, again, this is not new. It is on a national stage in a new way, but this is what we grapple with and the communities that we serve grapple with every day. And so there's a lot of attention right now, a lot of big funding commitments, with not a lot of clarity around how we're going to make systemic change to institutionalize a new normal and how we will sustain that over time. But to Suzanne's point about crisis being an opportunity, I think this is really our window of opportunity to really step into the role as the experts, because we are in community. We're not experts on other communities, but within our own communities, how we are experts, how we really hold very trusted relationships that we leverage. We know that particularly in these times, community members are coming to us because they trust us, and that's the foundation. And unfortunately, in current events, that's hard to trust institutions at this time. And so we are often associated with that. So really just thinking a lot over the last 6 months about how we draw on our shared experiences and maybe our shared struggles to actually come together in new ways that, again, are really sustainable. One of the things, even as a baseline, we really there's been so much energy around equity, but really drilling down from what does equity mean. And I'll talk a little bit more, I think, as we go on, particularly about racial equity. I would offer that we cannot get to equity without naming race and without centering race. And that's tough even, right? We're not all starting in the same place, and we're on a journey, and it's an everlasting journey. So just wanted to offer that in terms of my observations about, we didn't start in the same place. We're not going to be in the same place, but how can we try to get to the same place is really the opportunity that I think the last 6 months have showcased, and holding others accountable too, right? We see these big pledges, but the data shows that it might be scaling back. And so how do we really own the responsibility or the duty that we've really set up for ourselves as nonprofit leaders?
Great, thank you, Lucy. And we are on a journey, and I'm hoping that we're going to take our attendees on a journey today in terms of highlighting some of our experiences and learning. So thank you for that. So Erica?
Yeah, thank you. I would just add to that, from our vantage point as a grassroots community-based organization, what we've really seen when we think about opportunity through crisis is we've learned we have to ask the people we serve what they want. What do they need? For us, it was a Thursday. We found out that there would be no more after-school programming in the state. We had students in program that day. We asked them, what do you want? Do you still want to do something virtual? Do you not? What do your parents want? And from there, we made a virtual survey on that Thursday. And by Saturday, it had 130 responses from students and families who shared what they want. I think a lot in our industry, we go in sometimes with the savior mentality, or we go in to do the work to the community and sometimes forget to think about our families and students know what they need. They just need a platform to articulate and someone in a position of power to ask. So because we did that, we knew that our students and families wanted us to do something virtual, and we really found the themes of connected, persistent, and that they wanted to be productive during COVID-19 during the spring and the summer. So we stood up our virtual program that when on Monday we found out there was no school, it was okay, because our students and families had already told us what they wanted. Within a week time, we went virtual. And then the following week, you know, we had 90, 95%, 100% on all of our Zooms, but it was because we asked at the front end what was wanted. And so I'll talk a little bit later of how that actually went into programming, but for us it was a really big lesson because we knew that, but I think that it's not always respected or something that people think about as effective. And this really showed us, yes, don't forget to ask the people what they want.
Yes, that's such a good point, because I think on all sectors, we need to always ensure that we're not giving people what we think they need, but just asking community. So the community engagement piece is so important, and we can't highlight that enough in terms of all of our work, anything that we do, that we ensure that we give the community a voice and listen, and then act on that from there. So those are some of the steps. So thank you guys very much. So, you know, we talked a little bit about, you know, what's happened in the 6 months, what you all as an organization have been thinking about. So what did you find to be some of your biggest strengths, and how are you building on that through this last 6 months? Matt, I'll turn it over to you. How about that?
Sure, thanks. For those of you that know the Discovery, you know, we're 10 years old. When I showed up, it was the museum was about 1.5 years old. So I took over a brand new entity, and I had 50 staff members, and that's about where we hover at. When I walked through the door, I had 1 staff member who had worked in a museum before and 2 who had worked in a nonprofit before. So nobody knew what the hell they were doing or how to do it. And I walked through the door with 20 plus years of this as an industry and a profession. And what was interesting is when I took that, when I took the position, a lot of my peers cautioned me and warned me, oh my God, you know, your staff doesn't have any idea what the hell they're doing. And I thought, that's fantastic. That's a huge asset because I had come from a very large industry leader organization that was 80 years old, and you know, we created the way that you do things, right? And so what that meant was when I showed up at the Discovery in a value and a practice that we have sunk our teeth into and held throughout the time that I've been here, is that we don't have a way of doing things. We have a very, very clear mission that we're pursuing, but we are a very flexible organization. From year to year, from initiative to initiative, we have a lot of flexibility, which has allowed us to do some pretty incredible things in a short period of time and behave like an organization much larger than us with larger resources than us. And in fact, we've spoken at industry conferences on how are you guys able to do X, Y, or Z with, you know, being the size that you are and the resources that you are. So for us, one of the biggest strength has been our flexibility and the subsequent resiliency that has come with that. Because as we have had to grapple with, you know, some pretty horrific financial implications of this thing, and then pivot and make changes, either minor or pretty substantial changes to the programs and offerings, and creating brand new products and services in the midst of all of this nonsense and chaos, the staff spends about 2.5 minutes saying, yeah, but that's not, you know, that's not how we figured out how to do it. And then they let go of that and move on to, cool, how do we solve this problem? And so that flexibility and resiliency has been our key. So for the younger nonprofits on the call, if you've got that, hold on to it real tight. If you're a more established, older organization with ways of doing things, I would encourage you to think about letting go of a lot of that and seeing the opportunity that's here to look at, maybe how you do things differently.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Erica, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I like that. Flexibility is so important. Thank you, Matt. For us, we really think it's our assets-based mindset. So before I talked about, we ask families and students, what do they need? But we also ask them, how can you help too? So if we think about dignity of people, I'm the first in my family to go to college. My dad is from the Philippines. He has a GED, but I have a master's from Harvard. I am the example that I live in both worlds. I can see what my parents went through and I went through, and I see what people on this side also go through on the other side of systemic and structural inequity. And I know that my parents could help in every way. They just didn't have the funds, and it wasn't in the typical way that we think that parents should help. And so what that means for us, just like two quick examples, are we, one, started to do foundational needs. So we are a college access community group. We don't usually help with things like toilet paper and paper towels, but because that's what came up on the survey, we created a program that we could do deliveries every week, but we asked other parents available if they could also help with that. So we did it all in a safe way that made sense, but it's not just our staff or volunteers doing the work. There are families out there that wanted to do the work too. And because we had that mindset to ask and invite, we had more support and success with that. And then that also means with our own students. So we've helped, for example, with the COVID-19 support center with Puentes and Mi Familia Vota. And that's where people who are positive of COVID-19 can call in and get free groceries and get support. And we had our college students who are majoring in health sciences be part of Callers, that initiative. We don't always think to ask our students to be in those leadership positions, but when you have an assets-based mindset, it's the first thing that you think of, because those are the experiences they need to have now to be in positions of power someday, to be the people on this call. So I think always having an assets-based mindset to those you work with can really make a difference in the long run on your long-term outcomes and results.
Great, thank you. So you both, a few words that both of you mentioned were pivoting and being flexible, right? So that sounds like something we need to keep in mind. And so as we think of that and being nimble and being able to pivot, so Lucy, I'll send this one over to you. And what changes and how did your organization pivot and why? And why were those changes necessary? And I'm gonna, this is kind of a two-part question, because one of the themes that has, that we're threading through this whole conversation is this notion on equity, right? Ensuring that our outcomes are equitable and everything that we do is equitable and through an equity lens. So as you talk about those changes, can you also talk about how you ensure that the changes supported your community and led to more equitable outcomes?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mentioned that Lyft developed a new strategic plan that is just starting to roll out. Year 1 of 4 was really intended to be a time where we would be able to really explore, research, evaluate different potential paths to go, do some training to get us up to speed. And that really got fast-tracked within the last several months. We were already making some pivots, but really some drill downs and some narrowing. And as part of that, everything from internal communications to, what were we calling our work? Were we calling it just equity? What about housing were we going to be talking about? And we were really going to take some time to explore a lot of that. And this really accelerated things for us. There's a lot of energy around partnerships. As I mentioned, we know that we can't do it alone and that we have unique contributions, but we also really need to learn from the other networks and what everyone else is doing, that we're doing a lot of testing in some ways, right? It has really, to the specific question about changes, we've really gotten a lot clearer and bolder, I would say, about what exactly are the things that we're focusing on. When we talk about community impact, really a pivot from helping capital flow into communities of color, but to actually make systemic change, we need to ensure that we're making capital connections to community-led and community sustained initiatives to actually have sustainable change in communities. And that's a pretty big shift, and that's a pretty big pivot. We're also reevaluating how we assess or to make determinations on lending, for example. We have a new framework that we're developing, IRP, impact, risk, profitability. You know, for a large CDFI, not unlike, you know, private banks, we have admittedly kind of fallen into the pattern of leading with risk and profitability, and, you know, but making sure that we're mission aligned, and really a strong pivot to how can we lead with impact and then back into risk and profitability in a way that actually does change systems, you know, working within the existing systems that we know have not been, that have not led to equity for lots of different communities. And so how can we actually work within the systems that we operate to change them, to step into our position? You know, we actually, as part of the strategic plan, had done some recession planning before COVID, just knowing, you know, economic trends and, you know, how things were going, that we should probably be prepared for this. You know, that's not unlike community members, right? Or even each of us as personal individuals. It is a privilege to be able to be prepared for economic downturns and for emergencies, to be able to think about sustainability and the long term when crisis hits. So I offer that kind of two-pronged. One, for us to use that lens when we're working within communities, and know that not everyone has that privilege, but also as nonprofits, how can we use the privilege that we may have developed for the sake of community? And for other, and, you know, we have multiple communities, our nonprofit community, our community development community, and then the actual community members that we're serving. And I would say that to just underscore the commitment to equity and outcomes, you know, we have made a really strong concerted effort to, I talked about institutionalizing things. So really codifying, like really on a granular level, documenting what is it that we're looking to achieve? How are we thinking that, what's the roadmap for us to get there? And then accountability mechanisms that we're working in so that we have accountability partners, and that we are not going to, you know, tighten up the purse strings, for example, right? For our own sustainability, we're really going to keep a pulse on the community impact that's needed and make organizational decisions informed by those rather than the reverse, which we know has historically been a pattern in a lot of different capital markets, and unfortunately to the inequities that we see right now. Having really sometimes uncomfortable conversations, both internally and externally, is really important. These last few months have fast-tracked that in a way, but still, again, we're not on the same page with it. We often, you know, we really want to keep community. We want to keep good relationships because that's our strength, but making sure that we're not skirting things, you know, like the prime example of avoiding naming racial equity, for example, because, you know, we don't want to seem limiting, but rather reframing that again as an opportunity to really hyper focus on those communities that need the most attention to get us to systemic change. And then the last thing I'll say is understanding that, you know, the human side of this, right? We are all going through challenges in some way or another, whether that be parents that are, you know, maybe even puppy parents, but that are juggling all of the different responsibilities day to day, the isolation that we're experiencing by working remotely. And how do we not, you know, nonprofits, we have a tendency to burn ourselves into the ground, do the most with the least, and thinking about the same principles of systemic change and sustainability for ourselves as well. We have to make sure that we're not burning ourselves and running into the ground, and that we may need to have different approaches for different staff members. We may need to have different approaches for different communities, and that's not unfair. That's actually what is going to lead to equity. So lots of different moving parts, but that's what we do best, right? That's what nonprofits do best.
Great, thank you, Lucy. So when we talk about, you know, and we do have to acknowledge that nonprofits are doing the hard work. You know, they're doing the heavy lifting, and you do get burned out. So Matt or Erica, if there's anything you would like to add in terms of, you know, what changes your organization's made, and, you know, just to be able to pivot and address the issues that are happening at this time, and ensuring that through an equitable lens.
Sure.
Matt, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I'm happy to share on that. Very early on, when it became clear that we were looking at something much bigger than a week or two of lost business, and as we took stock of our projections and the damages, and then pivoted to a discussion of, okay, what are we going to do? When we got to that question, what are we going to do? One of the very first things that we did is we created a diversity, equity, and inclusion criteria for our decision making, whether that be around staffing decisions, funding decisions, program decisions, marketing and communications. We wanted to make sure that was always in front of us, so that as we were making some pretty significant choices about what was going to happen to us as a business and the people that work for us, but also what was going to happen to the people that we serve and how we serve them, that we were pumping it through this filter every single time. And I'd love to tell you that we got it completely right, but you know, we didn't, and we won't. But I think just the fact that we created that criteria and we hold ourselves accountable to it, and have shared that with anybody who's asked or wants to see that, has helped us pretty significantly. I could fill the rest of our time talking about the actual changes that we've made to the organization, but I can tell you that we are an interactive, hands-on museum. That's not a great moniker to wear during a pandemic. So we were prohibited from even operating under the governor's plan until July 4th. So we were closed for 110 days, which really forced us to think about how to serve our constituents better and in a different way. And then even when we had the opportunity to return to some level of our normal business still wasn't normal. And so we had to get creative about how we still delivered those kinds of learning outcomes and experiences with all the restrictions placed on us. And again, came back to that diversity, equity, and inclusion filter, because some of those changes were pretty significant. And had we not run it through those filters, probably would have missed some pretty big opportunities.
Great, thank you. You know, I see some questions in our Q&A. So I want to, Riley, can we open some of those up before we go on to the questions that I have? I really want to make sure that we cover some of the questions from the audience.
Yes, we can, Jocelyn. Our first question for you is, what priorities are changing among your biggest donors, and how are you aligning your work to adapt?
Ooh, that's a tough one, a donor-related question. So who wants to jump on that one? So Lucy, how about can I toss that one to you? And then if anyone else wants to jump in? Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a great question because as nonprofits, we are always finding changing, funder trends or priorities. I would actually offer a little bit of the reverse is rather, I talked about having some tough conversations sometimes or some uncomfortable conversations, but that includes with funders and having very direct conversations to Erica's point about like, this is what we are hearing and seeing in our communities. This is what the community says it needs. We ask that you orient or adjust your funding strategies to meet these given your mission statement. Particularly with COVID, and racial equity, I mentioned that a lot of funders are putting out these really big pledges. And so using that as an opportunity to say, I see that you've made this kind of high level priority. Let me share with you what that means in kind of our neck of the woods. And this is what we need to be able to do X. And right now, especially in, for example, in our early care and education work, the majority of the providers in early care and education are small business owners. They're women of color, there are immigrants. They run very small margins. They're not getting rich off of these small businesses, but they're providing a real key intervention for children and families that makes or breaks economic and educational mobility for the rest of our lifetimes. And so hearing from them directly has really been an asset for us. We've done little video snippets and actually interviewing the providers and saying, what do you need? And then when we've been able to respond with some grants or helping them with, connected to the PPP program, them speaking firsthand what this means for them and their community or their pods that they serve. And I think it really is an opportunity, but a responsibility for all of us to harness our collective power and to push philanthropy and the funder networks to respond to again, directly to what the communities are saying. It's not easy, right? Funders, we don't want to lose funding. We don't want to risk not getting some support. But in my experience, I have found that leaning into that risk, actually the ROI is ultimately much bigger. Does it mean you may not lose a grant or you might not, win a certain pitch, but in the long term, you will have, I believe, more funding and more flexibility to respond the most acutely to what your communities are saying they need.
Great. Matt, I saw you leaning in on this one. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll concur with everything on the foundation side and add that on the individual donor side, we didn't wait for individual donors to figure out what their new priorities were. We were out the door with a resiliency fund campaign ask within 8 days of being shut down. And we were getting responses from the community within 12 days. And we went out very fast with an ask. We didn't even wait for people to figure out what was going on. We told them, hey, here's what's going to happen. Here's what we're projecting, and we need your help, and we need it right now. And here's very specifically what we need. On top of that, we had 3 capital projects in the works, and we also carry 4 or 5 other restricted projects that go on from year to year. So we had this giant mountain of cash that we couldn't do anything with because it was all restricted. And much to the consternation of our development chair on the board, we picked up the phone and we called every donor in the last 18 months who had made a restricted gift to the museum and asked them to lift that restriction and move those funds to the resiliency fund with nothing more than my handshake promise to say, we're going to go back to this program and make it whole in one form or another whenever we can. But right now, this is where our need is. And with the exception of 1 donor, the other 70 plus all lifted those restrictions and moved their funds to the resiliency fund, which has given us some breathing room to navigate the situation in front of us. But rather than wait and listen and see where the opportunity was, we showed up on their doorstep with a plan and an ask, and we hit them before they even had a chance to know we were there. That was our approach.
No, that's great. And those are hard conversations that need to be had, but it also speaks to your ability to be responsive to what the community needs are, and everyone seeing you all as the experts because you have engaged the community and asked your clients and your constituents what they need. And so on the flip side of that, then hopefully your donors and philanthropy can look at it a little differently and understand, and then pivot and be flexible, just like the nonprofit sector has to be. So, right, with fingers crossed. Erica, I'm sorry, I think I interrupted you. Would you like to add anything?
Oh, yeah, no, you're okay. Yeah, I just wanted to add quickly, because I think this other part of this question was part of it too. How do you infuse addressing inequities and racism in this work? And I just wanted to share that for us, I come at this with We Empower 200 students and families a year with a 300K budget. So this is my vantage point. But something that I think was really important is, because there's all this talk of equity work right now, there are funders that align with understanding what does it mean to empower the community. And so something we've really done is try to find who are the people that get what we're doing, right? So I've shared a little bit about what we do, and the bias in philanthropy is that everything I shared means that we're a small, cute program, right? But even if we were bigger, we would intentionally have students have leadership roles. We would intentionally have families help us with our work, because we know to end generational poverty means sustainable change has to come from the people themselves. And there are more philanthropists, donors, grants out there that are aligning to this. And if you know that this is what you do, you can find them. So I'll just share an example. We're very lucky that we got $100,000 from the Give Together Now campaign that gives $500 cash transfers directly to families in their bank account. They give a code, and then in 2 days they get $500. And what was really important about this is that a lot of people balked at this idea because there's no receipts that are due. There's no paperwork that's due. There's no, you have to take a class before you get the $500. The donors understand that families just need cash right now, and we trust families and have assets that they can deploy that. And because people knew our work was assets-based, we were connected and got the grant for our families. And so I think it's thinking a little differently about who's funding you and how do you get the people who really are mission aligned and will, like, for us, we have an alumni student who's on our board of directors. I mean, she's a full boarding, voting, whatever. To some funders, that's crazy. To other funders, they get, okay, you're doing the work. You got to find those people, and that's what takes time. But I think that's where the ROI will come from.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of that matchmaking, right, that needs to happen with your mission and the donors that kind of support or are focused on the mission that you all have. So, Kelly, I'm going to open it up to one more question. I see we have some more in the queue.
Yes. Will the nonprofit leaders on the call speak to what steps they have taken to support their staff members in the face of remote work, reduced funding, increased client need, etc.? How do you maintain employee engagement and morale?
Very good question. Ooh. Well, I think maybe we'll start with Erica this time. I'm going to go around the circle and then go the other way. So, Erica.
Yeah, I would share what Matt said before about this flexibility. I think it's, again, having assets based with your staff, that all of our staff have different things going on. So we really, I think, one, allowed them to give feedback on how they wanted the pivot program to happen. So again, we didn't tell them what they had to do. They were able to pick, okay, I want to do this project, I want to be part of this. So everybody had that buy-in. And also just the flexibility of what something Lucy said earlier too, we're all people, we're all experiencing this in different ways, and still having people be accountable, because we're still accountable to grant deadlines and everything. But just knowing that work can be done differently. And I think as the leader of our group, being open to that was really important. I feel like that's a very general statement, but it really has made a difference for us that it can be different, and allow people to show you how they most want to do it, because then they'll come up with it.
Great. Lucy, Matt, any additional comments or answers for that one?
Sure. I'll just kind of similar to what Erica said, just like we're saying for community, you know, asking directly, what is it that you need? And it very much may differ across your staff. You know, often we may think that we know kind of the profile based on their employment with us or what we may know about them, but we really, particularly in these times, have no way to have a full sense of the scope of responsibilities or pressures that each of our staff might have in other places. So having flexibility, we've done things like days off, for example. You know, we encourage people to take their PTO, but then we hear the concern of, yeah, but everyone else is working that day. So I just come back to a huge pile in my inbox, or, you know, I feel like I actually can't catch up. And so we've done a couple of days where we actually have closed the office altogether so that hopefully everyone can unplug fully and recharge. We facilitated some conversations around recent events, particularly post the murder of George Floyd, and really giving staff an opportunity to be heard and to share things that are working well and what are not. And consistently doing that, you know, unfortunately, it doesn't look like we have a quick end in sight for our current dynamics. And so just constantly re-upping that conversation.
Yeah, and I'll just add a couple of very pragmatic elements. When we went to shut down, the building went dark. We sent all of our staff home. Within days, that started to present, oh, my computer doesn't have a webcam, or my back hurts because I'm using my kitchen chair. So we allowed staff to basically raid their office. They could take anything that they had here home. We had people that had standing desks and, you know, special chairs and computers and what have you. So whatever we had here, you were free to set up at home. The other thing we did is, you know, schedules went completely flexible. I have a lot of staff with very young families. So they're juggling their kids and their spouses' work schedules and all these other things. So we just kind of nuked our Outlook calendar and said, you know, all those standing meetings and things that we had are non-existent. Allowed us to kill a bunch of meetings that didn't need to be happening anyway. And those that did, we shifted around people's schedules. My development staff apparently are all night owls. I'm the only one that gets up in the morning apparently. And so they asked to move their meeting to Thursday night at 9 o'clock. I slept through half of it, but, you know, we met at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night. And even when we came back to being open and having some operations, we are only having staff in the building that absolutely have to be here. So everyone else is getting to continue to have that flexibility in their work environment and working remotely, which has had the additive effect is that flexibility of when to get their work done has at least taken one thing off of their stress level. The fact that I have said from my position all the way down, get your work done however you can get it done. You know, as long as the work is getting done, we'll navigate everything else. And having that permission and freedom to move around and not have to file a report with what hours you worked and when and exactly what you did remotely has been really valuable.
Great, thank you. So we're getting really close and tight on time. So, you know, I think one of the things, you all are leaders in your organizations and have kind of been living this, you know, crisis and being very flexible and pivoting and making the changes that need to. So what have you learned as a leader in your organization that you'd like to share? What have you done and what has evolved for you as a leader in your organization? Erica.
Yeah, thank you. And Lucy actually said it earlier. I wrote it down. Really, you talked about trust, right? So for us, it was, if we give this survey, we have to trust what parents and students say. If I'm flexible with my staff, I have to trust them that they're going to get it done. And so it's been really interesting. I mean, I drilled that down to, we had 4 students at UNR who chose to stay that whole time. I don't know if that's a decision that I would have made, but I trust that they know what's best for them. That means we sent care packages the whole time and made sure they were still followed up with, but that you can't do it all. You can't control everything, but you can trust that the systems you set up, that the mindsets that you have given are really going to work out. And so for me, it was really hard at first, right? You know, you're working all these hours and you want to solve it all. But I think if you just trust the people around you and the intent that you have, and if you're always asking those equity questions, you know, who has power and privilege, who's making the decisions, then you can trust that it's going to be okay. And that's been hard for me, but that's something that I've learned and has been good over the last couple months.
Great. So when I open this up for our last 2 minutes, Matt and Lucy and Erica, jump in too if you have more to say. So with that, what have you learned? And in addition to that, what advice would you give your peers on the line? Matt? Go ahead, Erica.
I'll just end mine because it's the same. It's just, I'd ask, you know, who has power and privilege in all the decisions you're making, from the student to the board member, and that can really help you see if there's equity in your work.
Great, thank you. Erica. Matt?
Yeah, I appreciate Suzanne's opening comments about, you know, being an optimist. I'm often accused of being an eternal optimist, and even right now I'm excited about, you know, what's going to happen on the other side of this. That said, the advice I would give in the learning and growth that I got to go through in the last couple of months is, as leaders of your nonprofit organizations, give yourself the permission to grieve. You know, you've put a lot of your heart, soul, blood, sweat, tears, equity into the work you're doing. And you've watched a lot of that just dissolve in front of you. And the thought of rebuilding it or building something new is overwhelming. There's an opportunity and a need there to grieve some of that. And I'm glad this is recorded, so I'm going to play this back for my wife so she can hear that I said this out loud. But you know, it's real, and there's some sadness that comes along with that. But grieving then allows you to get up tomorrow and move forward and take the next step.
Great, thank you. Lucy?
Yeah, I think what Erica and Matt are saying, I would agree with that, you know, really recognizing that this is an emotional time. You know, I've had to, being a very results-oriented person, like I'm sure a lot of you are, right? Really taking the space and the time to recognize what emotional process I'm going through, what others are going through, being compassionate around that, but also not taking our foot off the gas, right? You know, I often think if I'm going through this, the community members just down the street from me have it that much worse. And that's what I've committed my life's work to. So how can I take care of myself and others sufficiently to keep going, but don't lose sight of the mission. Don't, you know, be crippled by the fear of innovating and failing, even in these tough times. You know, unfortunately, tough times are cyclical. We will get through this, and we will have challenging times at some point in the future. One last plug I'll make is for data. You know, particularly in really emotionally heightened situations, I feel like data has been a really valuable tool to diffuse that. And, you know, when we're talking about really charged things like racial equity, you know, everyone is really suffering from COVID. But when we talk about those that are impacted the most, right, that can be really triggering. But when we can ground that in data and say, for example, you know, who's more likely to be infected by COVID? These are Blacks and Latinos in this country. Who's more likely to die from COVID? Those are African Americans in this country, and there's no negating that. It also doesn't mean that nothing else matters and that no one else matters, but how can we really center the limited resources of work, funding, energy that we have, and leaning into the discomfort is the advice I'll have. Again, as hard as that may be, I'll offer that, you know, we kind of signed up for that and that a lot of community members have no option about the discomfort that they are experiencing day to day. And so how can we coalesce around making the systemic, long-term institutionalized change that we've all talked about today? Easier said than done, of course, but the fight continues.
Yes, indeed. Thank you all very, very much. I know it's hard work. We appreciate everything that everyone on the line is doing. And thank you to Matt, Erica, and Lucy for sharing your roadmap to resilience and keeping us laser focused and just making sure that, you know, you covered a lot of great points, shared a lot of good advice. We know we have to be flexible. We have to keep our eye on the prize. And that we know that we have to do all of the work that we do in an equitable way. So I want to thank you, the three of you, so very much. I've learned a lot, and I hope everyone else is on the line has learned a lot as well. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it back over to Kyle and Michael.
Kyle, you're on mute.
Been on mute for a while, sorry. Thank you, Jocelyn, very much. I think it's important today to remember exactly what you said, Matt. It really resonated with me, is the grieving part of what we've been through. We convene the nonprofits down here. I know Michael does in the north, and it's now starting, I know it's starting to have somewhat of an effect on me. Suzanne, you spoke to the mental health issue. I've been very concerned about the effect of COVID on our community members, let alone those of us who are frontline responders in Nevada, which is often the case, right? So I thank you for highlighting that, Matt, in your points, because it is something I think we all need to now be cognizant of and could fall victim to or not lean into it and end up in some challenging scenarios. So thank you for acknowledging that. That's very courageous, actually. I want to thank you all for attending. I want to talk about next steps. I want to thank Suzanne McCormick, the president of United Way Worldwide USA, for being our kickoff keynote speaker, and Matt Sinclair and Lucy and Erica. Thank you so much. Jocelyn, thank you for leading the discussion. And of course, always to my colleague in the north, things would not happen if we didn't have this synergism together, and it's a great thing. And there's a question if we will be sharing the panelists' contact information. If you're comfortable with that, give me a thumbs up. Okay, then whoever just asked that, you betcha. I want to talk about just very quickly the next steps. We are creating a survey that we will be sending out to everyone who attended and everyone who did not attend. And we want to know this information because I know based on my discussions with Wells and the bank with Jocelyn is that there are challenges that are only going to become more pervasive. And the way to address them is to help each other do this. And I think that this survey is going to show what's important to you first and foremost. What subject topics, what specialists do we need to bring in to a Zoom meeting just like this? Maybe it's fundraising. Maybe it's how to unpack your strategic plan and pivot. Maybe it's, like Matt's case, we were closed down for days. Erica, you said something so important. We listened to our customer, right? That was like, I mean, that resonates with everyone. So we want to listen to you all 188 people who showed up for this. And I thank you for that, but we want to see what you want, what you need, what your desires are, so how we can help you, which in turn helps all of us. So that will be coming in the next day or so. Please be looking out for it, as well as this recording. I also would like for you to send it to anyone that you know that might benefit from it, to your board members, to anyone, because I think we're the temperature for the state of Nevada. And Lucy, even though you're in California, Jocelyn's in California, and Lucy, you're in San Francisco as well. We are the hub. We are ground zero here, as we're referred to by the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. So we have a way to go. So we got to get there together. So I want that all, but this feedback is an incredible, powerful tool for us to help. And we wanted to do this as quickly as possible when we put this together. So I want to thank again all those, Michael and Kelly Goodman and Nancy Hamilton and Miles Dixon and Christine Hess and Jocelyn for their ever-present help, and my team and the United Way of the North team working to put this together as quickly as possible so we could be responsive and we could be nimble. So please answer the survey, give us feedback. We want it. We want to help in any way we can, because that's what United Way does. It stands in the center of the community. It identifies problems and challenges, and it brings the best minds and problem solvers in to help fix it, create it, and build a new way forward. So thank you again, everyone. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Thank you, Suzanne. Yes, I think we're good. So I'm going to, Jane Saint is asking me, the Wall Street Journal article that Suzanne spoke of with the data points, she is going to be sending to us. We will attach it with the video. And I'm not sure if the video, I don't think we'll send you the video, the survey, and the journal. Will be the video this recording and the article, and then the survey will come on its own. So yes, thank you for that suggestion. So with that being said, and honor everyone's time, it is 1:29, and I want to thank everyone again. Be safe. We're all in this together, and thank you for joining us today.